very much looking forward to tonight's lecture, which is called Uncanny Valley on the Digital Animation of the Face. I will have a few words to say about the title. Weschler, of course, was and is, for a long time, director of the New York Institute of Humanities, a very important cultural institution, which is befitting for a major figure, intellectual figure, in New York and far beyond. Ren is a magnificent and prolific writer of many books. He got his academic credentials from the University of California, Santa Cruz in 1974. He was for about 20 years staff writer at the New Yorker. He has taught right now at NYU, but before that at Princeton, Columbia, UC Santa Cruz, Bard, Vassar, Sarah Lawrence, so a whole series of very important, prestigious places. He plays a major role in journalism and in the arts. His books combine the visual and the textual, the narrative. The narrative combines everything in his prose and in the publications that he edits. Just to cite one of his titles, Vermeer in Bosnia. Characteristic, as far as I know his work, is that his texts are like a submarine that go under and come up and delve into the collective memory of human imagery. And I think tonight's lecture, which is focusing on the animation of the face, if anything, is exactly going to do that. Because the term animation comes from the Latin anima, which means soul. So every engagement, even every digital engagement with the face, is a submarine-like delving into what is behind the face, what is possibly behind the face in terms of the anima, and the face also as a vehicle of expression of that very anima. And Ran, I admire him for his effort tonight to do this fantastic magic of delving and coming up. Before I give him the floor, I would like to mention the fact that his book, Uncanny Valley, which is a collection of his essays, is available for purchase outside this room, and he, if you purchase the book, will be very willing to sign it too. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is hard to pronounce. There's a very common name, which is Weschler, W-E-C-H-S-L-E-R, which is Yiddish for money changer, Wechsel. But Weschler, spelled the way we have it, is much, much less common. And in our family, we say it's because it's Yiddish for dyslexic money changer. And obviously, that doesn't work. Anyway, thank you all for coming. So let's get in the submarine and buckle our seatbelts. Faces hit walls all the time in the movies, but this is different. The wall these filmmakers keep running into, the ones I'll be talking today, is the face itself. Digital animators, that is, in their quest to perfect an ever more believable computerized simulation of the human face. A face moving through time. It turns out other things are easy. Bodies, for example. Quidditch matches, for example. It turns out they've now reached the point where they can do, well, you remember this, right, for example.
Here come the Bulgarians!
All that, of course, is completely digital. They would not get away with being able to do that with actual kids. Although one of the strange things that keeps on happening is that kids start doing the things they see in the movies, so that becomes dangerous. They've been able to get to the point where they can do in throngs, they can do battle scenes such as this one from this Marina, this is for you, this is from the film Troy. All digital. They can do hands, which when you think about it are pretty difficult if you look at your hand right now, but they've gotten pretty good at hands. I don't choose the music. I like the dirty fingernails. But what they can't seem to get right, and you've probably had this sense many times watching films, is faces. She'll follow as I move the cursor around. There's a technical term of art about this problem, which is that they look icky. This is what they keep on saying. How do we keep them from looking so icky? And it's getting to the point, or it was at the time I first wrote this piece, which was about 8 years ago I was assigned to do this piece, that there was a debate breaking out among digital animators whether it was even theoretically possible to imagine ever being able to do a believable face. Which didn't seem all that surprising to me. I had been called by Wired magazine, and they told me this debate had broken out, and I told them I didn't know anything about digital animation. They said, well, that's why we chose you, which is generally what always happens with me. I'm sent into these cold baths of new subjects. But as I was heading out, most of the stuff is taking place in San Francisco, so I was flying out. And it didn't seem at all surprising to me in precisely the terms that you were talking about, which is to say that animation is indeed anima, the soul. And the question is whether you can digitally animate the soul. The face is the seat of the soul in a way that the belly or a crowd or a hand are not. There is something profoundly complex about the soul. And in fact, as I was headed out, I took to thinking about somebody I often refer to in different contexts, who is one of my favorite people, a medieval mathematical mystic named Nicholas of Cusa, C-U-S-A. He was a diplomat. He was the Archbishop of Cologne, but he was also a number mystic, and he was, in fact, in his time engaged in a kind of polemical argument with Thomas Aquinas and the scholastic tradition that he embodied. I mean, if you think about it, Nicholas, by the way, is 1401 to 1464. In some sense, Aquinas, being a good Aristotelian, is basically making a huge inventory of the world. That you could do books on everything. If you do books cataloging all the fishes of the world, all the animals of the world, all the flowers of the world, all the rocks, if you catalog all the ethics, if you catalog the politics, if you catalog everything in creation, you are getting closer and closer to a comprehension of the Creator. And Nicholas said, well, that can't be right. He said, imagine a circle with an n-sided regular polygon inside. So a triangle, and you add a side, it becomes a square, and you add a side, it's a pentagon, and you keep adding sides. You eventually get to, you get this sort of thing. Although this is actually by Robert Mangold, which is actually a funny version of it. Can you see what's funny about this? On the right side, actually I can show you. He's on the inside here. Is on the outside there. This is one of those funny works of art which you can go to the gallery and you see somebody looking at it, and then suddenly they crack up laughing, and then you walk up and you say, what? But anyway, the point is that as you add more and more and more sides, the closer you get to a circle, as Cusa pointed out. Except then he said, but wait a second, that's not right. It's the farther and farther away you're getting, because you suddenly have a million-sided polygon, which has a million sides. A circle only has one. It has a million angles. A circle has no angles. And he said, Cusa says, that at some point you have to make the leap, his phrase, the leap of faith, his phrase, Kierkegaard gets it from him, from the chord to the arc. A leap which he says can only be accomplished through faith, the leap of faith, and which only happens in the context of grace, for free. And whether taking the God out of it for the time being, it seems to me that this is the challenge that people doing digital animation of the face are dealing with. They are making more and more and more asides as they get more and more insight, but they're getting farther and farther away from this mysterious thing, the soul, the naturalness of a human face. Having said that, I'll tell you one thing, they're having a good time. These guys, and most of them are incidentally guys, spend their days, you were just asking me what I should tell kids who want to be writers, what they should study. They shouldn't study, they should become digital animators, because that's the most fun you can have in the world. It's just, on a day-by-day basis, these guys are having a great time. Take, for example, Hendrik Juan Jensen, who was a full professor at Stanford. He's now at San Diego. And he was in the William Gates Senior Hall at Stanford University, and he had run the place to do his great life work, which was animating milk, a glass of milk. And when I went to see him, he explained to me, it was funny, by the way, the day I went to see him, he showed up late at the meeting because his car had gotten locked inside of his garage with the electronic door, and he couldn't figure out how to open it, and he had to bicycle instead, which seemed to me a metaphor of something. I wasn't sure what. But anyway, he shows up, and he starts out by dashing to the blackboard, and he says, you know, if you're going to do, for example, this table or that metal, or if you're going to do plastic, or if you're going to do an insect's carapace, or if you're going to do dinosaur hide, that's easy. That's Newtonian. That's just the formula for how light bounces off of a dinosaur is extremely easy. And he went to the blackboard and he did the equivalent of this. It's always the same formula. It just bounces. And that, by the way, is why the first major works in this recent round of animation, computerized animation, were plastic toys or insects or dinosaurs. He said that was easy. He said, now on the other hand, that is hard, which is to say an artificial glass of milk with an artificial light source rotating around it. And the reason is that with milk, light enters it, and the photons, instead of bouncing, they start ricocheting off each other in a quantum fashion and coming out at all kinds of weird angles. And whereas you can do the insects and all the Newtonian stuff on a laptop computer, you need a supercomputer to be able to do the calculations. He showed me his paper, which is a legendary paper on the subject, which is 20 pages of this sort of thing, to account for what happens with light in a glass of milk. And he gets like hours and hours on, I mean, you know, the supercomputer at Stanford is a very expensive thing, and he spends hours playing with this thing on important research. I'll let you tell, he'll tell you about it right here.
Familiar materials look completely wrong without subsurface scattering. Opaque milk looks more like white paint than milk.
You see it over there? Let me just show that.
Familiar materials look completely...
Sorry, stop that for a second. One of the things, by the way, when he was showing me this, he said, look, I got the meniscus. I said, what? He said, the meniscus is when, if you have a glass of milk, at the edges where it touches the glass, it goes up very, very slightly. And he says, most people don't notice that, and then it doesn't look right. This is a typical digital animator kind of thing to say, you know, the slightest thing that you don't get right makes the whole thing wrong. And in this case, he was very proud of his meniscus. But indeed, if you look at the difference, what's happening is that light, even notice when the shadow comes around, even when the light is coming from the other side, it looks wrong. It looks like, as he says, a glass of, I at one point called it a stalk of chalk, but it's a glass of wet paint. I think that's good too. But look at what let me go back and just do that again. As the shadow comes
Familiar
around,
materials look completely wrong without subsurface scattering.
even there it's glowing
Opaque
in a
milk
particular
looks
way.
more like white paint than milk.
And that is very, very hard to do. And in one of my favorite quotes ever, he said to me, dinosaurs are easy, milk is hard. Anyway, The way light hits a face, no matter how complex and time-consuming the requisite programming needs, and as I say, it takes supercomputers at this point to do it. That's solvable at some level. It's 20 pages of solving. But try this. Her face lit up as he entered the room. Try to model that. And that becomes the next big problem. In other words, you're dealing with light from the outside and expression going the other way. As I was getting ready to go interview everybody, I spent the evening before reading this wonderful essay. Now, how's that for a face, by the way? That's Jean-Paul Sartre. And he has a wonderful essay that's relatively hard to find, but if you need it, write me a note and I'll send it to you, on the face. And at one point he writes, "Only the lips moved, but the whole face smiled." Which actually, as it turns out, isn't exactly right. A lot of other things happen when the lips move, only infinitesimally so, and if you get a single one of them wrong, you don't get it. But he invokes the example of a marble bust in his exploration of the human face. But this time so as to heighten the contrast between the two. By the way, Jensen's other thing besides milk is marble busts. I should mention one other thing about Jensen. One of the reasons that milk is so important in digital animation is it turns out that the whites of your eyes have the same properties as skim milk. And if you don't get that right, lights of the eyes look like marbles. Beyond that, white Caucasian skin does the same thing as marble, and I'll play this thing for you here and you'll see what he's talking about. Let's see.
Traditional lighting models assume that light reflects only at the surface. As seen here, this produces a hard, computer-generated look. In contrast, our model correctly simulates the spread of light through the material, which blends surface features and leads to a smooth appearance.
For this next part of the lecture, you can either look at Jean-Paul Sartre or this, and I'll do you the favor of heavying this up. In any case, Sartre also invokes a marble bust. In the case of Jensen invokes it because white Caucasian skin does the same thing with light scattering as a marble bust does. But in the case of Sartre, he says, a marble bust exists in universal time, which is to say the time of instants set end to end, the time of the metronome, of the hourglass, of fixed immobility. Such a bust, he says, floats in a perpetual present. But, he then says, the face creates its own time within universal time. Against that stagnant background of the room, the time of living bodies stands out because it is oriented. In the midst of these stalactites hanging in the present, the face, alert and inquisitive, is always ahead of the look I direct toward it. A bit of the future has now entered the room, and mist of futuriety surrounds the face, its future. The face, Sartre goes on to insist, is not merely the upper part of the body. It is corporeal yet different from the belly or the thigh. What it has, in addition, is its voracity. It is pierced with greedy holes. The greediest, the most ravenous of these holes, of course, being the eyes. For now, quote, the two spheres are turning in their orbits. Now the eyes are becoming a look. And in so doing, changing the very nature of the thing that they are looking at, say that chair over there. A change that is in turn reciprocal. If I watch his eyes, I see that they are not fastened in his head, serene like agate marbles. They are being created at each moment by what they look at. He goes on to conclude, if we call transcendence the ability of the mind to pass beyond itself and all other things as well, to escape from itself that it may lose itself elsewhere, then to be a visible transcendence is the meaning of a face. Being a visible transcendence is Sartre's way of saying, and at the same time, and granted emphatically, not saying, having or expressing a soul. And try animating that. And in so trying, realize, as we've talked about, that the very word anima is the word for soul. So that, to animate is to ensoul, as it were. Very, very difficult. But we don't have to. The guys over at Industrial Light and Magic were telling me my first day, when I brought up Sartre, Cusa, the whole caboodle. Our job isn't to simulate an actual face with 100% fidelity. Our job is merely to fool the audience. Once you believe it, we're done. Not as if that was proving all that easy. There are hundreds, thousands of tiny details to be gotten just right. And one of the ironies of the work is that success is gauged precisely to the extent that they all, every single one of them, go unnoticed. As another fellow at Industrial Light and Magic, this is Lucas Central, commented, "We fail when the audience notices anything." Ed Hooks is an actor and an acting coach who lately is taking to coaching animators. And he marveled at their contradictory challenge as seen from the other side, the receiving end of the process, noting how you're telling people, be amazed but don't notice. It was interesting, by the way, when I was talking with him, he was talking about the difference between coaching actors and animators. When I'm coaching an actor and he asks me, should I raise my eyebrow here? My reply is likely to be, I don't know. Don't think about your eyebrow. Think about the emotion you're trying to convey, and the eyebrow will take care of itself. Before I go on, I'll mention something that Walter Murch, the great editor, film editor, he edited everything from The English Patient to, he wrote The Conversation, he edited Apocalypse Now and the Godfather movies and Jarhead and all sorts of things, and is a god among editors. And he one day was talking to me about blinking. And he said that he has noticed over time that when people blink, it isn't just that they're moistening their eyes, but rather it's a punctuation mark between thoughts in their head. That somebody has a thought, when the thought is over, they blink, and then they go on to the next thought. And you notice this if you're a film editor, because good actors blink at the end of the character's thoughts, and bad actors blink at their own thoughts. So for example, a bad actor will have an important part of the speech and then begin the next part and will blink thinking, I hope the director liked that, or I nailed that, and they get the blink wrong. And one of the ways as an editor, you know you're dealing with a good actor is that the edit always comes on the blink. That the natural place to edit the scene is on the blink. So as I was saying, that's another way of what in a certain sense, this guy Hooks was telling, that when actors tell him, should I raise my eyebrow, should I blink or something, he says, I don't know, just be the character and see what happens. On the other hand, when you're dealing with animators, it's exactly the opposite. You're building from the outside in. You don't experience emotions, and emotions get conveyed exclusively through such things as a raised eyebrow, which in turn has to be precisely calibrated. Raised, okay, but by how much? And what happens to the chin when the eyebrows get raised? To the ear, to the other ear, and so forth. Each of these details first has to be noticed by the animator even before it can be captured and programmed. And these guys have become champion noticers. Here are some of the things I found out across a couple days in the animation trenches. Anger is signaled by a heavy brow, but a heavy brow can likewise signal mere intentness. The difference is in the upper eye muscle. An eye blink is more than the top lid slicing downward. At the same time, the lower lid gets pulled up and in toward the nose bridge. Eye pupils converge toward the nose as they gaze into the distance. From a distance, one gauges where someone else is looking by the combination of the shape of the eye, i.e. the way the surrounding muscles are pressing in on it, and the disposition of its white. I can look at you way over there and tell whether you're looking at me. In the dark, I can figure this out by the slightest little tiny things. And if you think in terms of evolution, it's extremely important that I be able to do that. But if there was something going on back here, I would tell that you were bored, even though you're way over there. And you can likewise tell where I'm looking right now. And that, by the way, has to be captured. Think about the amount of visual field. It's partly, I can tell it from the whites of your eyes, and partly by the blackness of your eye. And it's something that is, the field of my visual thing that I was capturing that is absolutely tiny, but I notice it. And you need to get it right. one gauges how a person is feeling the same way. Close up, the really tough things to get right with the eyes are the semilunar fold and the caruncula, which is to say the overlapping tissues surrounding the little pink nub pressed right up against the nose bridge. Right there, that's really hard to get right. They move along with the pupil, as for that matter does the entire upper lid. Get those wrong and you've got a robotic approximation. Not all the skin on the face has the same texture and elasticity. Everything depends on the underlying bone and muscle, fat, and integument, not to mention the skin itself. Hence, facial skin doesn't pull and crinkle the same way all over, and each patch, therefore, requires a different algorithm. The physics of saliva sloshing around in the mouth turn out to be identical with those of the tempest-tossed sea in the film The Perfect Storm. And you can use the one to model the other, or anyway the folks at Industrial Light and Magic did. The folks over at DreamWorks went to huge lengths to get the uvula, that thing back there, to get that right inside Shrek's capacious mouth, to get it thrumming and vibrating just right, even though, predictably, it ended up being entirely obscured in black shadow. When a mouth opens, it doesn't just open like a garage door. Rather, owing to the stickiness of caked saliva, there's a sort of unzipping effect toward both corners. The way you can tell a true smile from a faked or a forced one is that in the one, the upper eye fold lowers slightly every time, and it doesn't on the other. This cannot be faked. The face is the one place on the body. Oh, but I should mention about that. This cannot be faked. This is a guy named Paul Erdmann, who is a nut, but a fascinating nut. He basically has cataloged all the different possible faces, and he has a list of 5,000 possible faces. This reminds me of one of my colleagues at NYU was giving a lecture, and he said that one of the fascinating things about a young sociologist had done this study where he had been able to show that every craftsman, no matter what, whether he's a shoemaker or a classical pianist or so forth, whatever it is, takes 10,000 hours of practice to achieve mastery in every field. And I remember turning to my friend and saying, the sociologist who came up with that fact must not have had 10,000 hours of being a sociologist. It's the craziest fact I've ever heard. But anyway, this guy has 5,000 faces. And one of the things that's, by the way, problematic about this, when you think, in everything I'm thinking, realize that the difference between a human and a robot is that they aren't feeling just one thing at any given moment. Any human being is thinking three or four, or having 4 or 5 different kinds of things at the same time. When somebody is thinking just one thing, we think of them as monomaniacal, as fanatical, as single-minded, and they look a little bit crazy. So even if you were to choose which of the 5,000 of the Erdmann faces you were going for, you still wouldn't get it right. Coming back to some of the other things about the face. The face is the one place on the body where muscles don't necessarily attach to bone. Often muscles fold on top of one another, one into the other, a fact that presents enormous challenge, that it presented enormous challenges to the early anatomical dissectors who found themselves mangling whole systems the moment they sliced through the skin. And it also helped explain why for current animators, legs and arms are so much easier compared to faces. It's almost that Newtonian thing again. This is just pulleys and levies, and so forth. But a face there's all kinds of things going on that are not attaching to bone, so it gets much more complicated. To really get the face right, you have to model it in conjunction with the whole body. Otherwise, you can get a weird effect where the body seems to be saying one thing and the head another. The same splay of muscles will communicate different emotions depending on the color of the skin. So if you get exactly the same algorithm and you have white skin or black skin, you get an entirely different expression, is how it's seen. And that's not even to mention hair. Don't get me started on hair. Don't get them started on hair. That's a whole other essay. The point is, though, that these guys have noticed a hell of a lot already, and they're noticing every day more and more. Theirs is already a million-sided inscribed polygon. Now, there's 2 different ways of doing it. Basically, you have, in one style, you have modeling leading to animation, and then I'll tell the other one. the two different things, one is called key capture, and that's represented, for example, by Shrek. And what you do there, our key frame, is that this is kind of the old style of cartooning where you have to build the bone and the muscle and the skin, and you build it all up, and then it's kind of marionette work, that you raise this muscle here, you raise that, and so forth. And the modeler is the person who comes up with all the different possible things that, you can raise it up this way, raise it down this way, and so forth. And then they hand it over to the animator, who then drives the car, essentially. The modeler builds the car. And when you go to see the modelers, they have volumes and volumes of books on anatomy and so forth, and they're standing, and they have mirrors, and they're looking at themselves, and one of them is spending his entire life looking at his curricula and doing kinds of things, trying to figure out how that works and so forth. And they're all building up this incredible inventory of knowledge about essentially animation in a certain sense. Well, here, I'll let you hear. There's this one of the very few women who at the time was a woman named Lucia Modesto, and she was a veteran of both the films Ants and Shrek, and she offered, I'll show you this. This is somebody else's interview with her.
Hairstyles, the clothing, we try to add complexity to the scene so that people, you look at the scene, it looks a little bit more believable. So what we do is that we get the body of a character and we put all the joints, which is like putting the skeleton inside, putting the muscles, putting the skin, making it deform, putting all the animation control so the animator can go in there and say, oh, I want to bend the arm, or I want to raise the arm, and they just go to a control called bend low arm, and they put something in there, and we do the inside of all that stuff. We build all the software underneath to give those controls for the animators. Also, it's just for the animation of the body, animation of the hair, some of the clothing set up, and all the facial animation.
In my interview with her at one point, she wanted to demonstrate something, and she showed two different furrowed brow effects on a 3D rotatable cyber model of Shrek's head on this computer screen, one of which took account of the bone ridge underneath the brow, and the other which failed to do so. And she said, the second is obviously wrong, she noted. It fails to take account of his skull, which of course stays in place as the muscle and skin slide over it. He has a skull in there, she stated emphatically before pausing. I mean, not really, she acknowledged sheepishly. Actually, it's just numbers. But so she can get to the point where it can be raised brow, lower brow, and so forth. Another guy had done it in a way where he had the brow on literally like a curve. So the brow raises at this rate and then comes down here. And if you want it to stay up longer, you just push the curve up higher and it stays and so forth, that sort of thing. By the way, there's a guy named Michael Paulus who has retroactively been going through the history of animation and figuring out what the skeletons of classic characters are. But in a certain sense, this sort of animation, as I say, harkens back to traditions of marionette puppetry. Pull a string and the arm goes up, pull another and the head turns in. Only here you're marionetting dozens of facial muscles, one on top of the next. More strings, more commands are getting added with each new generation of characters. And in animation, a generation is simply a matter of a few years. And it's easy to see how down the line things can get hopelessly tangled. Wittgenstein once suggested that philosophy unties knots in our thinking, hence its results will be simple. But philosophizing has to be as complicated as the knots it unties. And here you've got people who are getting, these body philosophers, the trouble is, are getting more and more tangled rather than less and less as time goes on. At a certain point, Modesto told me, it could get way too hard to animate in this fashion. There could be way too many controls for anyone to be able to drive a character. And all this, remember, to approximate the sorts of things that our own faces do automatically without giving the matter a second thought. I reminded of a conversation I once had with a lighting director in Los Angeles, a film lighting director, and we were on the Palisade in Santa Monica looking over the ocean as the sun was setting. And it's one of those great LA sunsets, it was just getting, the pinks and the oranges and even a little bit of green in the sky and the clouds, and it was just breathtaking. And we were just kind of watching that, and at the end of it, the sun dipped into the ocean, and the guy turns to me and says, "It's incredible the effects that guy gets with just one unit." And it's incredible the effects we get with just one unit. But anyway, The other way of doing this, and this has been more recent, and you'll know, is called facial capture, and it's a version of motion capture. And this is the pox people. This is the people who put dots all over the actors, and then they film, they capture the film, and then they just take out the dots, and they connect the dots with lines, and then as a result of that, both bodies and faces, they're able to get entire, and if you think about it, they're doing the opposite of the other way, which is building from the bones and the skin and so forth out. They don't care about any of that. They just want to know what the surface is doing. And then you get, for example, the first film that really took advantage of this was a film called Final Fantasy, which was said to be the total breakthrough in this regard 8 years ago. And that's when I happened to write this article. And so you get this kind of description of what's involved.
This is how people move. This is not a representation of how people move. This is really a new kind of animation.
And you know, the more dots you add, you can imagine, the better you get. This was, in fact, pretty lousy. They spent $100 million on this film, and they lost a ton of money because it just didn't work. And so you can imagine adding more and more dots, and you'll get closer and closer. But in a way, we're in the same problem as you're getting to the Nicholas Accusa problem. And in turn, it reminds me of that great Borges story, the Argentinian writer. Borges, who has a great story about the land of the cartographers. And he says in that land, cartography had reached such a pitch, such a climax, that the map of province took up an entire city. And the map of the country took up an entire province. In fact, the next generation, the map of the province of the country took up the entire country and corresponded with the country at every point. And then they realized that this was kind of hopeless, this was crazy, and in fact the art of cartography plunged into disuse, and now the map is inhabited by beggars and camels in the eastern reaches. In a way, you're dealing with this, and at one point I was asking them, you know, why don't you just use actors? And they all said, we know. We don't know why they're letting us do this. Don't say that. Every time we get closer and closer, they say, we say, why don't you use actors? But we all lose our jobs. But in some ways, that is the sort of thing. And then we get into the other problem, which was illustrated by some of those faces you saw, which were the icky faces. And there you're dealing, and here we come to the issue of Uncanny Valley. And Uncanny Valley is a great Japanese, here comes another of my favorite sentences ever to have written, a great Japanese Buddhist roboticist named Masahiro Mori, who, if you go online to look for a picture of him, you can't find one, so that's why I have that up there. Anyway, he has the notion of the Uncanny Valley. And effectively what he says is if you make a robot, he was talking about robots, this is 25 years ago, if you make a robot that's 80% lifelike, that's fantastic. If you make him 95% lifelike, you know, people are just going to love you. 95%, oh God, heaven. 96% is a complete disaster. And the reason is you've fallen into the uncanny valley. And that is the place where it goes from being an incredibly lifelike robot to a human being with something wrong. You can't quite figure out what it is. The minute you fall into that valley, it becomes icky. It becomes creepy. And the less you can figure out what it is that's bothering you, the more creepy it becomes. We have these kind of detectors in our body, and clearly going back all the way to evolution. I mean, if you think about this, I've been spending all this time up till now telling you about the incredible complexity of the human face. I mean, in exactly the same way that the human brain is far and away the most complicated thing we humans have found anywhere in the universe. The human face is far and away the most complicated thing on our bodies, much more complicated than our bellies or even our feet, which are pretty complicated, or our heart or anything. I mean, the face is just incredibly complicated. And in fact, the amount of acreage in the brain that is devoted to interpreting faces is much, much more than with anything else in the universe. Our brains are incredible. So it's not only you're dealing with the most incredibly complicated thing, but you're dealing with the thing that we are most sensitive to of anything. And there you get into real uncanny valley problems, because if you get the slightest thing wrong, it's creepy. So once it enters the uncanny valley, if you're dealing with crowds, for example, when they were doing those crowds in the battle scenes, they hit the uncanny valley, but they just kept on persevering, so that at 95% they were in the uncanny valley, at 98% they were pretty much out of it. But with the face, up to now anyway, it seems that when you fall into the uncanny valley, you're there at 95%, and you're still in it at 99.999999. If it's 0.00001% off, it's creepy in some way. And that is the theoretical question, whether they're ever going to be able to get beyond that. It's almost like a Gödel mathematical problem. That this is the incompleteness theorem in animation, that the system cannot include itself. And there's something about faces that people with souls will be freaked out by a digitally animated face at some level, at some point. Having said that, there are still uses for animation, and one of the uses that was the most astonishing to me when I was there was I was being told that already they were beginning to use, and in the future they will use much more, they are going to need to use digital animation to reanimate the faces of actors who've been Botoxed up. That, for example, Cher is a wonderful actress, but she can no longer do certain faces that she used to be able to do. And Michael Jackson was likewise. There also are things like, for example, and by the way, that's also a fascinating thing. I mean, that's also a version of the problem with Playboy models. It is. I had a friend who worked at Playboy in Chicago, and for the magazine, and this was 10 years ago. And she said that once a month, on a particular day, the FedEx package would arrive from Los Angeles, and it was Hugh Hefner going through the only thing he was still working on, had a property of, was the centerfold, and he would, with his grease pen, have just pointed out every single wrinkle and blemish and so forth that nobody else had noticed that had to be airbrushed out. And so you had these Playboy models that were completely perfect. And then you had this bizarre phenomenon of women having operations to make themselves look like Playboy models. And this cycle that gets weirder and weirder. But then the difference is that when, with airbrush, it's just on a photograph. When you do it to yourself, you end up in these sorts of situations. There are other sorts of things. For example, this is an interesting one. They're able to take old actors and have them say new things, for example, for commercials. So here's Marilyn Monroe.
Monroe never said,
I know what you mean.
in this
I know
movie,
what you
but
mean.
image metrics can make her say it or anything else.
I know what you mean.
Say, Fred, you can even choose popular brand name drugs.
But generics are cheaper.
I guarantee you, Fred and Ethel never sold prescription plans.
They don't tell me what to do?
They do now.
That'll be a refreshing change.
So you get that sort of thing. You also get this sort of thing, which is somewhat creepier. This is an ad for a company that will offer you this.
For those with ears, let them hear. For those with eyes, let them see. GravityDesignStudios.com. We speak for your business.
Ugh. Did you notice, by the way, with her, it was really bad. One of the things that wasn't happening was the earrings weren't moving, and the rest of the face this was a classic example of how you can get it wrong. There are several things that you get wrong, and things I'm going to show you. The teeth, the black behind the teeth, and the teeth turns out to be extremely difficult, and that in this case they think that just talking is confined to the face, and then they can never blink a few times, and she's blinking at the wrong moments. But look at the earrings, for example.
For those with ears, let them hear. For those with eyes, let them see. GravityDesignStudios.com. We speak for your business.
No, thank you. Then there was the film, some of you may remember, the man who wrote the screenplay for The Truman Show, then the next screenplay he wrote was called Simone, and he directed this. Actually a pretty good film. And Simone stands for Sim 1, Simulated 1, and it was the first artificially created actress, supposedly. And Al Pacino has created the software to have a completely artificial actress. And so I'll just show you some of the
Virtually perfect.
The star is digitized.
Are you ever going to tell the truth about me?
He's talking and she's talking.
After your next picture.
And then, for example,
And the lies that have a life of their own.
What's the matter, Victor? You look so sad.
now did you notice, by the way, with there, one of the things, how they did that, if you think about it, is they got an actual actress, but they had to find one who was Botoxed up, and then they had to degrade her further. So rather than, when they didn't make a simulated actress here, they took a real person and they degraded them. I'll just show you that face again, and it will give you...
And the lies that have a life of their own.
What's the matter, Victor? You look so sad.
But then you also have this rather fascinating phenomenon, which is that they are getting better and better and better with each iteration. And they reached a crisis with Shrek 3 with the Princess Fiona character. And what happened is they'd gotten so good. Remember, they're doing it from puppet-like, and they'd gotten so good, and they were so proud of themselves, and they showed the results to a room full of 6-year-olds who started crying and running from the theater because they'd fallen into the uncanny valley, and they literally have now had to dial back on what they're capable of doing because they keep falling, they're getting so good that they've fallen into the uncanny valley. Anyway, this was all written 8 years ago originally when I wrote about it, and so when I put it together in the book that's out there, I brought it up to date, and of course the major thing that's happened since then, I mean it's getting better and better, but one of the major things was Avatar. And Avatar, James Cameron, in so many words, claimed that he had crossed the uncanny valley. Well, here, I'll let him say it for himself here.
Before he could do that, Cameron first had to make sure his technology could cross what's known in robotics and animation as the uncanny valley.
Let's say this is an absolute human, and this is a, kind of a talking moose. As you approach human, our attraction to the character goes down. And then at the last second, just when you get to a true human look, it goes back up. Well, we needed to get on the far side of that dip in the response curve, which is called the uncanny valley. And we needed to get to the opposite side, where we believed, we don't have to necessarily believe that it's 100% photoreal, and we don't have to necessarily believe that they actually exist, but we have to believe in them as emotional creatures. And so we came up with the head rig. We call it the head rig. It's basically just a kind of helmet, very tight, conformal kind of skull cap that's based on a life cast of the actor's head and a laser scan. So it fits very tightly and smoothly and comfortably. And then, there's a carbon fiber boom that comes out with a little camera on the front of it. And that camera shoots the face in a nulled out close-up. So even though the actor's moving all around, running, jumping, yelling, screaming, jumping off stuff, jumping over logs, running flat out, whatever, we're getting that facial performance absolutely locked off.
And from that, they were able to record every facial movement, from the actor's lips to their eyes.
And that proved to exactly be the kind of holy grail approach to how to do CG faces, not the stuff.
No, and no for two reasons, by the way. First of all, they're blue, which is to say blue metallic paint all over their faces. That's easy, we've established. That's easy, that's plastic. The other reason is they're aliens. To the extent that they're creepy, we say, well, they're aliens. So I mean, he in fact hasn't gotten there at all. It's fascinating, by the way, that where the real work is being done now is in digital games. Even more than in film. So for example, a lot of the major work right now is in LA Noire. I don't know that some of you may know this game. I'll let this guy tell you about it.
For a long time we've been able to make buildings that look good. We've been able to make cars that look very real. The level of realism goes up and up and up. With previous kind of technologies that you'd use, like facial motion capture, we didn't really ever feel that we could pull that off. You could never really tell whether someone was lying or not. With this technology, what you see is what you get.
I'm always happy to help the LAPD.
Mystery is a detective story, so the believability of the actors' performances is key to gameplay.
That's one of the key strengths of our system. We can actually see all the subtle features that animation traditional ones just can't do.
Cole Phelps, traffic. What have we got?
It's really acting a scene.
By the way, this guy looked unreal to begin with. They found this robot actor to play, but anyway. Okay. Oh, wait, I blew it. I got to go back, sorry. Let's start again. Oh, sorry.
For a long time, we've been able to make buildings that look good. Detective story, so the believability of the actors' performances is key.
That's one of the key strengths of our system. We can actually see all the subtle features that animation traditional ones just can't do.
Cole Phelps, traffic. What have we got?
It's really acting a scene in two parts. The motion capture and then the motion scanning.
Lines, and as they talk, they get processed and turned into 3D.
And action. So the guys' names that I've been
Watch
seeing
in a second how the
repairs over
bodies
years,
don't fit the
they're
faces.
fully licensed and accredited.
We go from 2D videos to 3D meshes.
I think you're lying, Rasic. I think some of your men aren't fully licensed.
To compressed versions for the game.
I think some of your men aren't fully licensed. You're desperate to cover your sales.
The level of detail is just so high.
And it is getting better and better, I'll grant that. One of the things that is quite fascinating is, and it's been said for a while, that when they finally do get, if they ever do cross the divide, it's going to happen in one of two places. It's either going to be black people or old people. Black people, interestingly, and you'll see it right now, they are able to make much better because, in fact, black skin is much more Newtonian than quantum in terms of how light bounces off of it. They don't have as many of the challenges, the quantum melt, the melt challenges that we were talking about before. And I mean, just look at the difference here in this scene.
You sold the drugs to Cornell Tyree and Tyrone Lamont.
Oh, I sell fried steaks and black-eyed peas.
It's much more present. The reason that white skin turns out to be, that old skin turns out to be, is that we are so used to seeing old actors, ever since the beginning of time, have so much powder on their faces and so much, all kinds of stuff before they're put on the camera that they already are having those kind of light, so we're used to that with old faces. And they're also, the skin is less supple, and so it has a sheen that's different. This is a kind of funny one. This was somebody showing off their latest system.
I had to think about this long and hard at the beginning of this process and say, are you deluding yourself, or do you really think that you can do all those things? And I decided, hey, I might just be able to pull it off. The jury's still out.
What I like, by the way, notice how black skin done this way actually looks white, which is literally the light bouncing off it directly. But one of the things I like about that particular passage is they're talking about themselves. Before they started this whole process, they were trying to decide whether it could even be done, but they thought it could, and maybe they'll be able to pull it off. Not quite, but anyway. This is interesting. Watch this group here. This is his face is being run by the other guy.
Ryan beats his big brother Bobby with a baseball bat.
And so this is an old guy, so that works pretty well. And you can see what I'm talking about in terms of the difference with this here. Watch this.
Captain, we're rolling.
Those are all being driven by that other guy who's acting. Yeah, I know how you feel. Anyway, this is interesting. This is an interesting one because watch what happens with the eyes. When they don't have the eyes right, when the first turn here, they're not focusing on the eyes. It doesn't look right. But the minute the eye starts moving correctly, it's much more convincing. Here was an interesting one where I'm not exactly sure what they're doing here, but this is a French.
Voyez une image.
c'est une image de moi. Pourtant, cette image n'a pas été filmée. Cela me ressemble, mais ce n'est pas moi. Et pourtant, je contrôle ce que je dis. Je contrôle la façon dont je le dis. Je contrôle mon apparence.
So apparently what they're doing here is they're taking a photograph, and they have been able to get to the point where it's animated. What's wrong there, by the way, are the ears. Did you see that? The ears are literally almost like attached to the back, so I'll show that to you again, and you'll see what I mean.
Vous voyez une image. C'est une image de moi. Pourtant, cette image n'a pas été filmée. Cela me ressemble, mais ce n'est pas moi. Et pourtant, je contrôle ce que je dis. Je contrôle la façon dont je le dis. Je contrôle mon apparence.
Or here, this is pretty impressive, but again, it works best when they're dealing with a alien type.
We
creature.
used stress maps, which we triggered from the face
That
robot
guy
rig.
is making that
Once a shape was
animation.
triggered, these stress maps would also be triggered, which would create wrinkles and subtle details that we see and we love and push the animation bar a lot higher as well.
With the addition of Face Robot, Autodesk has done a great job of providing the best tools for facial animation.
So as you can see, it's getting more and more and more exact, but at the same time, I think it still is in that uncanny valley. Having said that, I want to conclude by showing you some of the things that I thought were the most interesting that I encountered, and where they had, in a certain sense, leapt over something, but I don't think it was the technical challenge. When I was doing this, and this is actually very interesting, the best thing I saw my entire time 8 years ago was something that was done at Industrial Light and Magic, which was this guy Hugo. And it was a little 8-second snippet in which Hugo said, this character says, "What do you mean, me? No, come on, it can't be me, it must be the other guy, I'm real." And it was so affecting, his anxiety about whether he was real or not, that you didn't notice the way the ears weren't working or that things were wrong. They were able to take that self-reflexive kind of anxiety and make it so poignant. Second fascinating thing is, this is 8 years ago, and they cannot find it anymore. This is something about digital stuff, by the way, that for all the way in which everything is available, in fact, nothing's available. The entire Clinton administration has gone to historians because it's all on kinds of email and so forth that no longer exist, and they can't even get at them anymore. And somewhere in their archives at ILM is Hugo, but I've been trying, I've got good people looking for it, and they cannot find it. They remember it, they said, yeah, that was really great, I wonder where that is, and they cannot find it. It is like 8 generations, 10 generations of software back and so forth, so it's hard to find. Another sort of thing, let me show you this. This is Bob Sabiston. Bob Sabiston has invented this process, which you sometimes see in commercials. It was you'll recognize it from certain kinds of films. But what's fascinating is he starts with a film, and then he has 30 different animators in his employ, and they will all take 30 seconds, and they will draw with their own hand, with their own individual hand, with different hands, a face. Talking, and it seems to me this is much more real in many ways than some of the stuff we were seeing before, but look at this. This is some guy in the park in Washington Square, NYU, who he just filmed one day talking. Oh, wait, not that, no, go back, we're going to get to him in a second. No, watch this.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. What do you think about astrology?
What do you think about astrology?
Well, there might be something in it, but the thing is, when you meet an astrologer, they will tell you 2 positive things and 2 negative things, and one of them is going to be all right. If they knew, why did they not know it, that there will be a tragedy on September 9? All this, I don't buy that. You don't accept it. If you want to accept it, if you say it is true, the way you think, your destiny is made each and every moment. The way you think, the way you feel, and the way you act, your destiny is made each and every moment. It depends upon the quality of your thinking, feeling, and action.
I mean, in some ways, isn't that more immediately? And I think it's because of its handmade quality is related to its human, the human face. I buy it completely. Part of the enchantment effect has to do with the voice, and voices, all my interlocutors agreed, are essential to the magic, both distracting us from transient imperfections and carrying us along. But mainly it has to do with the story, and that was true of Hugo too. Even in 8 seconds. What do you mean, me? It can't be me, it must be the other guy. I have to be real. Turn off the sound and immediately notice the too stiff ears, the way the eyes move when Hugo blinks, the overly rubbery consistency of the skin. The lack of detail inside the mouth, the inner lips, tongue, and teeth not having been tracked in motion capture upon which the creature was based. But with the sound on, we were immediately transported into the story, the narrative. A convincing and absorbing narrative had been precisely what was lacking in Final Fantasy. The sense of narrative, our tendency to experience everything as narrative, being at the very core, ironically, of our ensouled and incarnate natures. I'm reminded of well, actually several things. The way in which in the same way that our pancreas secretes insulin and our gallbladder secretes bile, our brains secrete stories. That's who we are. There's the story about the 2 Oxford dons who are, this by the way, a warning, spoiler alert, this is a sexist story, excuse me, I didn't make it up. And just reverse the genders if it bothers you. 2 Oxford dons, one of them is a mathematician and one of them is an engineer, and they're talking about Zeno's paradox, you know, the paradox where the arrow gets shot and it gets halfway there, and before it can get to the target, it has to go halfway to the target, and before it can get to the target, it has to go halfway to the remainder, and so therefore it can never get to the target. When you think about Zeno's paradox, you realize that Saint Sebastian didn't die of his wounds; he died of a heart attack. But anyway, they're having this conversation. At that moment, a beautiful woman walks by, and the mathematician, looking at her, thinking about Zeno's paradox, despairs of ever being able to attain her. But the engineer knows he can get close enough for all practical purposes. And in the same way, these guys are trying to get close enough for all practical purposes, and maybe they can. Maybe they will someday be able to cross. Having said that, I've tripped over my own punchline, but in some ways, the most affecting piece of animation I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years is Marcel the Shell. How many of you know about Marcel the Shell? Do you know? Go online, you'll see Marcel the Shell. Marcel the Shell is the stupidest piece of animation ever done. It is a crazy little conch shell with one googly eye, 2 feet. It's Marcel the Shell with shoes on is his name. And it's minimal animation, but there's a little 3-minute animation. There's now a part 2 that's come on. But it is completely affecting. Well, here, I'll show you.
My name is Marcel. Oh no, that's not the first time I've done that. My name is Marcel, and I'm partially a shell, as you can see on my body, but I also have shoes and a face, so I like that about myself, and I like myself, and I have a lot of other good qualities as well.
Make sure to watch it. It's very Marcel the Shell. You'll find it.
My one regret in life is that I'll never have a dog. But sometimes I tie a hair to a piece of lint and I drag it around. I love you. Come with me. Come. His name is Alan. Guess where I found him?
Where?
Under a tooth. Well, you know what they say.
What?
Lint is a shell's best friend. Do you want to watch me try to lift this?
Sure.
Alright. No, I can't lift anything up at all. Sometimes people say that my head is too big for my body, and then I say, compared to what? Here, come here. Come here. Come here.
that thing that he does, come on, think about what's going on. That affection you have for this ridiculous little shell with this googly eye is exactly the same as the affection he has for that little piece of lint. Come on, I love you. My daughter is 25, and when one of us is late for something, come on, I love you. but you can't help but believe the fervent love that shell has for that stupid dust ball, a projection no less real and heartfelt than the one you yourself are experiencing at that very moment for the same damn little shell. An effect considerably more tidally powerful than anything in Avatar, achieved at 1 gazillionth of the cost. And at the end of the day, we're talking about narrative, about the pull and the thrall and the lure of stories. Years ago, and this is going to date me, I was just starting out as a writer, so I was 28 or 29, and I had this great idea for a story. I was going to go back to the kindergarten, where I had gone to kindergarten, and I was going to hang out with the kids at recess and just hang out with them and hear what the stories were, the jokes that they were telling and so forth. Can you imagine? And so I literally did that. I was just 29 years ago. I just hung out with kindergartners, and you'd get arrested the minute you try to do this nowadays in the United States. But anyway, the thing that was absolutely amazing was the jokes were exactly the same jokes that had been there when I was there, told with exactly the same cluelessness. They were all vaguely sex jokes that the kids didn't realize were sex jokes. Well, at least in my time they didn't. I don't know about these days. But one of them, is the Sally tells her mom, Mommy, guess what? I made $1 today. How'd you do that, sweetie? The boys bet me I wouldn't climb the pole. And I did. Oh, silly, they just wanted to see your underwear. Well, I fooled them. I wasn't wearing any. Ha, 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 ha. Just guffaws all around, and lots of these jokes. And it got me to thinking that maybe the truly living thing on this planet are the stories, the jokes, that there's a colony of jokes that live at LeMay Street School playground. And there's this river of human flesh that goes through LeMay Street School, and that they just but that the real living things are the stories. The same with stories generally. God invented man, the wise man says, because he loved stories. In this case, the wise man is Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, the great Hasidic storyteller. And he tells the story that there was about to be a pogrom. And this wonder rabbi, things were getting very tense, went to a secret place in the forest. And he lit a fire in a very, very secret way. And he said a very secret prayer. And he turned to God and said, surely, God, this must be enough. And it was enough, and the pogrom was averted. And in the next generation, it fell to his son. Another pogrom was starting, and the son no longer knew the place in the forest. But in his backyard, he built the fire in a certain way, and he did this prayer in the exact way. And he said, surely, God, this must be enough. And it was enough. The pogrom was averted. In the next generation, it fell to his son, and he no longer knew how to do the fire. The riots are taking place outside, and all he knows is the prayer, and he does the prayer, and he says, surely, God, this must be enough, and it was enough. It was averted. And then the next generation, now we're the great-grandson of the wonder rabbi. He doesn't know the place in the forest. He doesn't know the way to light the fire. He doesn't know the prayer. All he knows is the story. And he tells the story, and he says, surely, God, this must be enough. And it was enough. God invented man, the wise man says, because he loved stories. And maybe the other way around. Man invented God for the same reason. Or maybe narrative invented both of us, couldn't do without us. Hallelujah, amen. Thank you.
Actually, I have a small comment and a question. The comment is that the theory about the story and as the ultimate truth or the ultimate generator of.
The ultimate carrier, let's say.
Yeah. Well, but you seem to suggest that it's actually something like
Probably
the generator
more.
of.
Right, yeah, right.
And I was reminded of the meme theory. I think it's of Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
So, is there a conscious relation between the two in your mind?
Why don't you describe the meme theory? I mean, I can do it too.
Well,
but
I'm not
Okay.
Dawkins certainly,
Right.
and I cannot. Basically, the idea is that as you have genes, and genes, Dawkins has the notion of the sack of genes. So the humans are a sack of genes.
Right.
And the genes are far more important than the sack.
Right.
So memes, he says, are things that survive in minds or need minds in order to recreate and procreate.
Right.
And so the minds are not the real thing that think of thoughts, but the thoughts are the things that need minds in order to progress.
Right. And in a way, it's in the same way that the genes need bodies to carry them. Culturally, we can speak of genetic material that are memes. And so, for example, a recent meme is the meme of the spraying policeman. You know, that scene in Occupy Wall Street where that policeman was just going through with pepper spray. I don't know if you saw that, but immediately that went all over the internet, and there were hilarious images of you know, in Syrah, the policeman going through a Syrah painting and spraying everybody, or and this became a meme, the meme of the spraying policeman. It's interesting because in a different context, I have a different book, which in fact, remember the lecture I gave here 6 months or 3 or 4 months ago about convergences, about how certain sorts of ideas keep hopping. And in fact, the structure in which they hop, it's not even ideas exactly as images or combinations of images, or the way they hop is that everything we see in terms of what we've already seen. So for example, there's that great moment in John Berger where he talks about there's the Christological meme, for example, so that when Che Guevara was killed and he was shown on that plinth, John Berger almost instantaneously wrote this great article where he said, we all know what this photograph is based on. The image that was hot-wired in the brains of the generals when they took their pose around the body, and in the mind of the photographer when he framed it, even though they didn't realize they were doing it, they were recreating Rembrandt's anatomy lesson. Which in turn was riffing off of Montaigne's crucifixion, deposed Christ. And that just happens over and over and over again. And I have a whole book on this called This Book of Convergences. And I think that memes, I think, are more individual flashes, whereas narrative, in that sense, is a trill of memes, in some sense, or you could say that narrative is memes plus time, in that sense, and that our brains, all those little curls and furrows and so forth in the brain, which will in some sense, by the way, be the subject of, you wouldn't believe this, but there's going to be a talk here in 2 days on coral reefs, crocheted coral reefs, and one of the things that coral reefs are very much like are the brain in terms of their hyperbolic structure, and that ends up being also about narrative, about how the gazillions and gazillions and gazillions of neurons attached to each other in the brain and the firings over time take on this kind of evolutionary pattern where things that get repeated over and over again get more and more stronger and stronger connections, and then you see them over and over again. Go ahead.
I also have a question. If you look at all the examples that we saw, two things strike me, and that help or that doesn't help. The two factors don't help, or the lacking factors don't help us convince that these are real, somehow real or comparably real to real humans, and that the stories that you see are extremely bad stories, and as far as there is any acting by these kind of robot-like figures, it's very bad acting.
I think that is partly true, although one of the fascinating things about real life is that the stories are very bad. In real life, they're all jumbled up and they're lousy, And that's one of the reasons we turn them into stories, to compensate for that. But if you wanted to make a very, very, very realistic, we are so used to faces looking, what faces should look like when they're angry and so forth and so on. The next time you see somebody who's angry, they're actually not doing a very good job. They are falling short of the model of anger. So there's that problem. But having said that, I agree with you. I mean, and in terms of if you wonder why the acting might be bad, can you imagine acting with this camera in your nose, you know, and so forth? But conversely, by the way, if we go back to the origins of animation, Mickey Mouse, for example. I mean, that's just a little squiggly line. And you can get endlessly more emotion into a little squiggly line because of our need to project onto them all these feelings. And oddly enough, another way you could put this is that the more realistic you make the face, the less emptiness there is for us to project onto.
So the role of the role of the viewer is in most cases left out of this of the equation.
Yeah. And that, by the way, is interesting also in terms of Walter Murch. Walter Murch is an incredibly interesting fellow, by the way. You should have him here. Whenever I'm teaching my class at NYU, there comes a point in the class where I always say, Walter Murch is the most intelligent person in America, and that will be on the test. The question will be, who is the most intelligent person in America? And the answer is Walter Murch, and that's 10 points. And again, there's 10 of these things I give them over the semester, and then we never have a test. But anyway, but Walter Murch, he's the guy who did that thing about blanks, but he also talks about the role of the editor is to leave emptiness that people can project onto. That you always have to take, and in fact it's a little bit like Uncanny Valley problem, that if you leave too much information in the scene, there's no room for people to come into it. That you're absolutely, in film narrative, you're having to leave a lot of emptiness in terms of motive or immediate thought and so forth. Often, for example, the crescendo of the anger, you need to be showing the person from behind because you need to be able to project onto it. But that's also, by the way, true in narrative writing.
I have a small question on speech. You were saying you were showing how everything got more credible once you added voice to the face. Question is, there's also the way of synthesizing speech. So is there also an uncanny valley in speech, and is it easier to get over it?
It's interesting. There are two issues with speech, which one of them they have gotten over, which is speech recognition. If you think about how incredibly complicated a problem that was, to have a computer be able to understand my speech, your speech, my us, the noise, you hear that little buzz in the back of the room, to know not to include that in its analysis, to, all that kind of stuff was incredibly, incredibly hard. And for a long time they thought they wouldn't be able to do it, but they're getting better and better at it. You still get these very funny little blips where you ask the computer something and it answers something so completely insane you can't understand, what thought you said. But that's getting better. And some of the voices, there is now this voice on the iPhone, on the new iPhone, that you ask a question, and I think probably part of the reason that they're able to get as far as they are getting is because of the roboticness of speech in most service industries. So that when you call and ask a question of a robotic distance service provider, they talk in a kind of monotone. I don't think they could get those voices that they're giving to do approximations of anger or frustration or so forth. But they can get a certain kind of roboticness. One of the things that's also true, by the way, with this, that you have this strange paradox where one of the reasons we might cross the uncanny valley is because humans are going to be more and more robotic in their interactions with each other. So that now you walk down the street and you see somebody talking to seemingly nobody, and it turns out they have one of those phone things. And so much of bureaucratized human interaction is becoming more and more robotic that it might be possible that we'll cross the uncanny valley by coming at it from the other side. So.
Do you think that there is more of a preoccupation towards animation and now than there has been in the past, or if it's just literally an avenue for Hollywood to make more dollars? And also, we seem to have this penchant for seeing artificiality, which is where the animation sort of seems to fit really well. And is there a correlation to this new trend for 3D?
The first 3D is definitely an attempt of Hollywood to make more money, and it's ironic because what Hollywood was trying to figure out was a way to get seats, to get bottoms in the seats, as they say, or eyeballs or whatever. And they figured if they did 3D, that was something you'd have to go to a movie theater to see. And now, damn it, they're inventing 3D television sets, and it's going, that's a problem. There are various, in fact, Walter Birch in particular has a fascinating theory about why 3D could never work. And you can look that up. He was on, Roger Ebert, the film critic, has a blog, and he has a whole thing of Walter Birch explaining optically what the problem is. It has to do with the fact that whether or not you are looking at with glasses or whatever, at the end of the day, you're looking at things happening on a flat surface, and that your eye is being asked to do two contradictory things, and it constantly is overcompensating one way or the other. Having said that, I've seen a few films that are. I mean, I thought that, for example, what you now have suddenly is some of the masters are beginning to start using 3D. So you get Martin Scorsese and Wim Wenders has done an amazing thing with Peter Bausch, and to my mind, the single most amazing use of 3D was that remarkable. Werner Herzog cave of Fall. I mean, 3D was invented for that, in some ways. So I mean, that's definitely the case. In terms of animation, I would argue that animation goes back to cave drawings, and it is a completely. There seems to be something. I was very fortunate about a year ago to be in Australia. And I was up in the Aboriginal Northwest country, and we were taking a walk, and we came upon this one kind of cave-like place, and it was strewn over with cave drawings which were thousands of years old. And the notion was that this was the multiplex, that this is the place that people would come, that the artists would work on it all day, and then in the evening, with torches, that make it flicker and so forth, they could have all kinds of strange effects, that everybody would gather and he would tell the story and go over and move the fire over here, and then he'd move the fire over there and so forth. I mean, it seems to me that there's just this kind of age-old love of this sort of thing. And so, I mean, I don't blame Hollywood at all for that. I think, in fact, Hollywood registers that fascination. And I think if you go back, animation was languishing. Wasn't it The Little Mermaid that kind of kicked it back into gear? It was The Little Mermaid followed by the whole series of Pixar films and so forth. And what you were beginning to get was what would happen what can we do with computers that we weren't able to do with the human hand? And so, I mean, I think at some level it's the endless human fascination with doing stuff. And I'm less cynical about it just being Hollywood kind of coming up with things. And as usual, genius is genius and lousy is lousy, and there's a lot of both.
I think the interesting thing is consider what Peter Jackson's doing with The Hobbit at the moment, 48 frames per second.
Right.
And literally they're saying that it looks like they've punched a hole through the back of the cinema and you're watching real life. So it just seems like we're not satisfied with this. We have to continually pushing this.
Yeah.
And literally maybe we're going to discover new uncanny valleys in other areas.
It's interesting. I mean, that the need for the hyperreal you could, if I put on my Marxist sociologist hat here, I could really talk about the thirst for reality when reality is being bled from our everyday lives more and more. But I'll tell you one other, maybe we'll stop it, I'll tell you one other Walter Murch story. He was invited to the Exploratorium, which is this wonderful science museum in San Francisco, and he was the artist in residence, and he was invited to come up with a new kind of hands-on toy that he could play with. And he dealt with the fact that the human brain, and this is going to be interesting with that 48 times a second thing, because the human brain basically works at somewhere between 23 and 26 cycles a second, which is to say, and he built this thing, that if you take a strobe and flash it 10 times a second, you can see the flashing, and 20 times a second you can see the flashing. At 24 times a second, it becomes a single a single thing. Similarly, if you take a sound, if you have earphones on, and you have a poppy sound, pop, 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 pop. If you do it 10 times a second, you hear the da-da-da-da-da-da. If you at 20 times, at around 24 times, it becomes a single tone. Similarly, if you take your hand and you take a needle and you just very, very lightly touch, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, you will feel it that way at 18, 20 times a second. You'll feel this kind of mosquito-like buzz. At 24 times a second, it becomes a single point of pressure. All of which is to say that the brain, the reason you have frames at 24 times a second is because that is basically the brain seems to be electrically 24 times a second is doing a sweep of itself, and so you rhyme with that. It'll be strange to see what happens with 48 frames a second. Anyway, why don't we stop with that? Okay. Thank you so much.